Alright, here is my audience of 7 for my informative speech. Hi everyone, I'm Donnie Parker, and this is for Dr. Robinson's Elements of Speech class. We are going to talk about a subject that is very near and dear to a lot of people right now in the U.S. is school violence. More importantly, we're going to talk about what can be done to maybe help with school violence. So, for the content of our speech, we're going to talk about the history. So we're going to look back at the history of school violence, see maybe where we got first documentation of it. We're going to go through some facts about school violence, maybe to inform us a little more about what school violence is. We are also going to learn how to understand school violence, which is probably not going to happen because I don't know that you really can understand school violence, but we're going to do our best to try to get an understanding and a grasp of what school violence really is. We are going to look at an incident that happened recently in Spring Valley High School. So we're going to go into depth a little more with that incident and get a little closer with that and see what maybe went wrong in that incident, or if anything went wrong. People differ their opinions, but we're going to look at that incident, and we're also going to look at what the faculty of the school, or the students, and the SROs, the student resource officers, may be able to do to help reduce some school violence. The history of school violence goes back as early as the 18th century. It goes back to 1764, to be exact. In 1764, there was an incident called Pontiac's Rebellion School Massacre. And that was Pontiac's Rebellion School Massacre. It was where 3 men entered a schoolhouse, and it's somewhere near present-day Greencastle, Pennsylvania. And these 3 guys shot and killed the schoolmaster. His name was Enoch Brown, and 10 children. So back in the 18th century, we had 3 guys go into a schoolhouse and they murdered 10 children and the schoolmaster. And from 1764 until the present day, this has been going on. It has been increasing almost every decade from then to now. The 21st century is the most active. I mean, right now we are definitely in the most active time of when school violence has occurred. We're going to look right here at a pie chart that will show you in the 18th century, the blue little thin line shows you that there were only a couple incidences. And then the pink or purple, you can see how it grew a little bit more for the next century, and these are 100 years. Alright, and then you look how it almost doubled for the 20th century, but we're still in the 21st century, and we're already way more than that. This does not include just suicides and stuff like this. Is basically just in-school violence. It could be harassment or altercations or anything in a school setting. Facts about school violence. I broke it down kind of into three parts. You have student versus student, which is self-explanatory. You have student versus faculty, and we have an intruder or mass violence. All right, so in the student versus student, let me go back here 1 second. The student versus student section here, we had in June 10th of 2014 in Reynolds High School, it was Troutdale, Oregon. Jared Padgett, who's 15 years old, he shoots and kills a 14-year-old Emilio Hoffman in the school gym, and later goes and kills himself. Another example, Central High School on August 21st of 2008 in Knoxville, Tennessee, another 15-year-old kid Jamar Seiler shoots and kills 15-year-old Ryan McDonald in 2011. 3 years later, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison on a plea bargain, basically. In student versus faculty, we had Spring Valley, which I made mention of before. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. And you also had in January 5th, 2011, in Millard High School in Omaha, Nebraska, there was a 17-year-old that opened fire on the principal, the vice principal, and students. He killed himself afterwards, about a mile down the road. After he shot the principal and vice principal, he later killed himself. The vice principal later died. So we go from the student versus student and student faculty to intruder and mass violence. So here at Sandy Hook Elementary, everybody knows this one, in Newtown, Connecticut, Adam Lanza, he's 20 years old. He guns down 20 children, 20, and they're ages 6 and 7 years old. He also killed 6 adults who were part of the faculty, and he turned a gun on himself. Later, they found his mother dead of a gunshot wound too. Then you had Columbine High School, which was in Littleton, Colorado, and an 18-year-old and a 17-year-old go in and kill 12 students. They killed themselves in the school library. When we try to understand it, we got to know the definition. A definition of school violence would be any violent activity that can create a disturbance in an educational system. And it doesn't have to involve shooting. Alright, it can be anything, any altercations. And there are warning signs and causes for this. And when you look at the students, then you have warning signs like prior history of violence, drugs, alcohol, tobacco use, association with delinquent peers, poor family function, poor grades in school, or poverty in the community. When we look at Spring Valley, did I go past that? Let's see here. The Spring Valley incident, it was on October the 26th of this year, and this was student versus faculty. That's where where a teacher asked a student to leave class. The student wouldn't do that. And then the officer tried to remove the student. The student resisted, and the officer then tried to do it by force and tried to get the student out, and it didn't end well. The desk flipped over. Everybody's seen the video. And the officer was suspended. When we look at reducing the school violence, in conclusion, we have the students and faculties and student resource officers. But the students, I think, if their role in the situation, it should be obedience and try to do the right thing. You know, faculty, you need to always try to prevent it. Try to prevent what we have. Watch for those at risk. Watch for signs. You need to try to build relationships. And SROs and administration, if needed, then they have to use the force. They have to use force maybe to enforce it. So here are the websites, newspapers, and journal articles, books, websites that I used. So in conclusion, I want to thank you guys for coming, and I hope you have a nice night.